It might be ours. All
No,
right.
I mean, it's all of it, right? Like we're on other sides of the planet and doing video and like poor Zoom is just trying to handle it
And we're
all.
trying to break gender,
Yeah,
equality. So
yeah,
it's clearly
totally.
going to break some things.
Yeah, the patriarchal World Wide Web is like, this can't happen. This
Exactly.
conversation can't
Exactly.
happen.
All right. I'm excited. We're talking to Kyle Myers, author of this book, Raising Them. This was a book, I was just rereading Father Figure because I just got the hardbacks and I was in the bathtub reading through the whole thing yesterday. And I realized I quote you a lot in it. I didn't realize how much I quoted you in it until I was both reading it and thinking about our conversation today. I think that what I want to start by doing, well, let me start by saying, this book was really important to me in the writing process. I was about halfway through writing Father Figure, and it was really important to me that that I presented this discussion about fatherhood identity in a way that was really inclusive beyond just questions of cisgender equality. And I was not really, I was not a pro at that. And now I think I got it down pretty good after a lot of research and practice. But at that time, it was new to me, and it was a process of discovery. And I guess to make that clear, I guess I'll start by bringing up something in your book, and I'll start with a confession, which is that when I first before reading your book, whenever I would hear about any kind of gender creative parenting, I would think, well, it's a little extreme. I mean, I certainly didn't, always been a kind of equality person. So whatever people feel like doing, I wasn't going to judge them. But somewhere in the back of my head, I always thought, is that putting your politics on a kid? Is that asking a kid to be something that they may not be? Is it fair? And I guess what I really realized while reading this is that it's not so much about teaching, trying to encourage or coerce kids into being genderless as much as it is about giving the freedom to not have to be constantly berated with the with the gender stereotypes that I think all parents know. As you
Mhm.
push a pram down the street, people say all these crazy things depending on what gender they assume the child is. Is
Mhm.
that is that a is that a fair way to at least describe a meta part of the argument here?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you're not the only person who has the knee-jerk reaction of like, I don't know about this. This feels like too far. And I think that by by writing the memoir, by kind of showing people what our life is day in and day out, and that people can actually relate to it because they see that our life is like 99% like any feminist parent, any parent, right, who's trying to like protect their children from gender stereotypes, but just being able to show like there's some practices that using they them pronouns, not disclosing your child's genitals to people who don't need to know, um not assigning a gender, not using gendered language, like these practices actually make feminist parenting and like inclusive parenting a lot easier. And so I think that people, after actually being introduced to a family who's doing this, whether it's mine or someone else's, it helps um like subside a lot of that like knee jerk judgment and stuff. And so I think it seems like in reading your book, like we have similar values, of like what we're wanting for our kids to not be trapped by these stereotypes and to be able to know that they can come to us and talk to us about their gender, their sexuality, their frustrations, whatever, and also kind of teach us along the way. And so I think that our books are even like really good companions, I think, for it, because such a huge part of gender creative parenting is on the parents themselves, like especially in the early years of like of Zoomer just got to like have this wonderful childhood like
Wait,
all
wait. We should
kids.
say we should say who Zoomer is for those who haven't read your book.
Yeah, so Zoomer's my kid who's now 5 and who uses he, him pronouns. But when Zoomer was born, we didn't assign a gender and we used they, them pronouns. But and raising them covers the like kind of the backstory of how I got to that decision and meeting my partner and us deciding to not assign a gender to Zoomer when they were born. And then the first like 3 years of parenting that way and what we had to navigate. And I think so much of it is on, okay, me and Brent, how are we going to model gender to our kid, right? Like we both have careers that we love. We both want to be involved parents. How do we consciously navigate this so that our kid is learning about gender from us, in a really equitable way? And then also, what are the language changes that we can do? What are the behavioral changes that we can do to make sure that we're buying, like diverse clothes and toys and books and all that kind of stuff for Zoomer? So I just think it's so much on parents trying to just cognitively and consciously unpack how they were raised and socialized to not have this like intergenerational transmission of sexism onto their kids. So
Well, we're so excited to know you because we have our own versions of that with 3 teenage boys and a 12-year-old girl. And we didn't start out in gender. Well, actually, I think you were far more so. We're a second relationship, blended family. Really exciting to hear that I didn't realize there was a broader community of people really looking at how to navigate this in a concrete way. So can't wait to compare notes.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you just talk for a bit, because I know you do a lot of this. I wonder if you could point to some examples of where the gender socialization really does happen in those early years of childhood. Because we've all heard a million of those parents who are like, I didn't give them trucks, I didn't give her anything pink, so therefore it's proof.
Yeah. Because then he loved trucks and she loved pink or something. So like,
Right.
yeah. It's innate. Like Hot Wheels was written into his DNA. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that socialization, right, happens. I think kids' gender is made up a lot of things. I do think that there are just these like natural components, whatever, like in their soul and their personality that like are just what it is. But I think that so much of kids' gender identity and expression and understanding about gender and sexuality is very environmental. And that environment, though, isn't just parents, it's the media, it's teachers, it's peers. Like how often Zoomer comes home and I have to kind of like undo what he has learned from his 5-year-old friends about thoughts around gender, and it's like, okay, like how do I do this in a way that doesn't like, make him be like, oh, mom, I know, and like be uninterested in talking about this, but also try to get a word in. So I just like, there's so much about like where you live, who you're around, who your community is, that I think really influences kids' possibility models, right? To be able to kind of like model, to see things that resonate with them and then they want to emulate. So I think with like gender creative parenting, we knew like, okay, Zoomer's looking to us. Zoomer was in childcare from the time when Zoomer was 5 months old. And so there was just a lot of forces at play there about like teaching Zoomer gender. And so I think what we were trying to do as gender creative parents was try to bring all of this unconscious, just implicit, insidious bias around gender and these sexist stereotypes, try to help like wake it up in people's minds so that they could catch themselves. Cause like we weren't around Zoomer all day, every day, right? Like we weren't able to teach Zoomer this like utopian gender vocabulary or experience because that wasn't real life. Like Zoomer was being raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, right? There was like a lot of cultural and religious, like a lot of white, like, I mean, like that's the world that we were in. We didn't do gender creative parenting in a vacuum. And I kind of think about that a lot. Like when people are like, oh, like Zoomer's a boy, like Zoomer identified as a boy when, at 4, like, so do you feel like it didn't work? And it's like, no, like I like all kids, cis kids, trans kids, non-binary kids, like all kids come to some type of like words, right, that they've picked up from, their environment to be able to describe themselves, and they see people who they want to be like. And so I just think like, no, it didn't not work. But I also think that if we would have been like, we're off the grid, raising Zoomer in the woods without Netflix, then I do think Zoomer's gender identity and expression would be different, right? But it's just like this, you're who you are and how you want to express yourself and what your interests are truly this just this conglomeration of millions of interactions and and things that you're exposed to. So I just think more than anything, we just wanted to make sure like Zoomer's going to know who they are, who he is, and we just want to make sure he doesn't experience any like shame around that, no, like in his interest, that he's just like really encouraged, not forced in any direction, but also not restricted, from specific directions like so many kids are. And like something that like a parallel that I try to draw a lot for parents is that what kids learn so much about like life skills in the world through play. And like play really is this first initiation into like teaching you how to be a human in your culture. And so when girls are only given like dolls and tea sets and they're told not to get dirty because like their hair, like it took so long to do and their dress is so beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And like likewise with boys, like being given trucks and like being told not to cry if they fall out of the tree, and given all of these like Lego and stuff, like all of those things are actually really great. They build on certain life skills like empathy and communication, or like spatial skills, right, and like motor development. But what gender creative parenting is trying to do is help people realize like all kids need all of those things, right, to be able to develop as like really well-rounded humans. Like we need to be able to do that so that we can also have an interest, also be able to like be exposed to different things. Like I think I connect the dots so much between like there's a reason there's occupational gender segregation, and it links back to like what are kids exposed to in childhood and adolescence, right? Like if a girl is never introduced to coding or robotics, like when she's 18 years old in college, she's not going to go, mechanical engineering, like I'll have a crack at that. Like you have to be exposed to things. And so that's the main thing, like we can't be complaining that dads aren't involved, but no one bought their son a doll. Like no one, like had their son apply for the babysitting job, with the neighbor. Like you cannot be surprised when adults either like lack certain skills or don't feel confident with certain things if you prevented them from experiencing them in the first 18 years of their life.
Totally. So I love examples, and I'm just so curious to know, what are some examples of things that you did that you even may have thought, wow, this is even progressive for me, or possibly, but that has really, that you want to share with the world? And they can just be small things, big things. I'm a foreigner to this language, so I can't wait to hear what some of the examples are.
Yeah. So I think some of the things that I'm maybe most proud of that took me out of my comfort zone are things that anybody could do, whether or not they assign a gender to their kid. And which is why I think it's important to share these examples. And so Jordan would know this because I wrote about it in Raising Them, but like standing up to like calling out sexist bullshit when you see it, that I think a lot of feminist parents just don't. And it could be because they're just like not connecting the dots and thinking about it, or they just don't want to rock the boat. But one example would be, there was a track meet in Salt Lake City, like a kids track meet. And all of the kids would be like prepubescent or just like on the cusp of puberty. It was like I think you had to be like 11 or younger. And we took Zoomer when Zoomer was 2. And so it's like these cute little toddler track meets, whatever. And I had asked ahead, like, is this just mixed gender? Like all 2-year-olds running together? Or are you going to be separating them by gender? And, they were like, nope, it's like all kids. It's just divided by age. And it was like, awesome. Like that's great. So when we went to the track meet, it was like, all right, like 2 and 3-year-olds come down for the 50-meter dash. And so we went down, and one of the organizers was like 2 and 3-year-old boys over here, 2 and 3-year-old girls over here. And I just, I would like just stopped in it, and I had to balance all this in the space of 20 seconds, right? Like my brain was like, pew, 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 you know, like, what do we do? Like, do we just like flip a coin and put Zoomer in one of these lines? Do we just tell Zoomer to walk into one of these lines? Or do we protest this? You know, like, do we protest this? And I decided to protest this. And I was verbally saying like out loud to like other parents, like, well, they shouldn't be doing this. This doesn't make any sense. Like, let's just have the 2-year-olds run and the 3-year-olds run. Like, what are they doing? You know, like this is planting the seeds in 3-year-olds' minds that they can't run together, that they're significantly different, that boys are better than girls, which is why we're separating them, right? Because like the boys are going to be faster than the girls, is this like implicit bias. And so I was like, no one was hearing me. The organizers didn't give a shit. The other parents were like, just like, it doesn't really matter, does it? You know, as if people think, I think it's because people think, well, like the trans kid should just go into whatever line they want. Got it. Right. But like, where does the non-binary kid go? Like, where does like the intersex kid go who like has an intersex identity and doesn't like, you know, these binary categories? So I just like walked up to the counter and was like, I need my $10 back. Like, we can't be complicit in this. And the organizer, you know, the volunteer was like, I'm really sorry that they did that. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. And I emailed the board the next day and like sending all these like stats, right, about like sports and how like when you separate them, then girls lose confidence in their athletic abilities, and like and then boys start to believe that they have like, you know, sexist attitudes, that they're better than girls. Like, so, you know, and they're like, oh, your email generated a lot of conversation on the board, you know, like, we'll try to do better next year. And then I've come to find out the next year they didn't. They segregated kids again by gender, but this time around we didn't go, but my friends went, and their child is non-binary, and the kid chose to go into like the boy, like, you know, like was like, well, I would feel most comfortable running with the boys, but the boys were pushing this kid because of like his long hair and their like sparkly leggings. And so this kid had this just like, you know, shitty experience, like, won the race, like, let's hear it, but right in the time experienced bullying that wouldn't have happened if they just would have said, 10-year-olds, it's time for you to run, right? Like, so I just think that was an example of like, there are kids who are being excluded. There are so many repercussions, right? That like, this is just teaching kids that they can't have fun together, can't compete together. And then, right, and this was like 2018, and then flash forward to now and all this anti-trans legislation, right? That's just like, we have to be, as parents, even if you have cis kids, you have to be going, nah, like, we're not going to do this, right? Because I think if you have enough people doing that, especially cisgender parents of cisgender children, of saying, I don't think that you should separate the kids, we need to be inclusive, and we need to not like promote sexist attitudes, then I think, right, like, that's where more of this like sea change can happen. And then people will stop gender separating like this default thing that needs to be done when it really doesn't. So like, that's an example that any parent could have done. But I think because it was just like my habit and like my, you know, mission in life to like see these kinds of things and call them out and not participate, that's an example of just my life.
Well, I totally appreciate that, because I actually was convinced I should have been born a boy until I was about 11 or 12. And, you know, just classic, like short hair, whatever, you name it. And I wonder if today, if I would have, I don't know if I would have transitioned, but I love the idea of just not even having to have a gender. It's so liberating.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the question is when we were in Greece a few summers ago, I don't know if you remember this, I think it was a German family that had multiple children, and all of the girls were in the same bottom trunks only as the boys, and they were like maybe 6-7 years old. And I remember you saying, looking at them going, that makes so much sense. You don't genderize, you know, the swimsuit until there's like a reason to cover something or whatever that is. Is Do you think it's more, are there other countries that are further along and this is also an American problem, or is this what do you look at in terms of culture to culture?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. So I think within different cultures there are pockets. Like I think a lot of like most cultures are still right, like there's still binary genders. And actually, even though I think like in Germany, for example, where like not sexualizing little children does like it totally makes so much sense. Like here's all of your speedos, like and your sunscreen, have fun. And I have had the same thought, right? Of like, why are we putting kids raised as girls? Why are we putting them in swim tops when they're prepubescent, right? Like it is this like early sexualization of, right? Like you need to cover that up when you're 2 years old, 3 years old, 7 years old, whatever. And I think that that's a great thing to start thinking about. And I think all cultures have, right, these pockets, these communities, these movements that are really trying to push back on sexualization of kids, on stereotypes of kids. But there are certain things like it is really, really hard to do gender creative parenting in Germany, like the German language, right? Like a lot of these languages like Spanish, Italian, German, French, just linguistically are totally binary gendered, right? Like in Spanish, like the table is feminine. Like so it's just it's linguistically impossible to do right now, right? To be able to like have gender neutral language in the same way that you can in English, which is such a huge component of it, right? Because like how we speak about things is how we think about the world. But and even I think it was like France up until 4 years ago, you couldn't just name your kid anything. Like if we were in Paris, we couldn't have named Zoomer. The government would have been like, that's not a thing. Like, absolutely not. You had to choose a name from like, this is the boy name list and this is the girl name list, right? Which erases intersex kids, which erases like parents, ability to be able to name their kids whatever they want. So but I do think in different spaces, like these movements are happening. And as far as gender creative parenting goes, I think the English language wherever you are in the world, can make it a little bit easier. But like even coming from the US to Australia, Zoomers in a public school, but all public schools here have uniforms. And so right, like that's really different than the American public school system where just like kids are wearing whatever they want. And in some ways I think that uniforms are kind of like an equalizer as far as everyone is just wearing, right, like you have to wear this color of bottoms and like this color of a top. And so in a way it kind of removes a lot of the like the class markers that kids get made fun of for not having like the brand name clothes or whatever. But I also think like I'm missing like the cues that kids are genderqueer, like I'm missing those cues that I think are so fun in America, where it's just like kids just like rocking up however they want. But here it's just like this sea of just like, two colors. Yeah.
So I guess I have a question for you that I was thinking about while I was preparing to talk to you today. I was thinking that when I was doing my previous book, The New Childhood, I was traveling around and I would talk to different parents, and there was at some point in that process where parents always come up to you afterwards and they say things like, I have 3 kids, I'm the dad of 3 kids. And I realized that for every time they would say that, the first thing out of my mouth would be boys or girls, right? And on the one hand, one hand, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, there's the problematic about how many people are just excluded by keeping the binary categories. But also I realized that I had some like back of my mind assumption that if I knew that, I could somehow imagine the experience in the family. And it's just the moment it hit me, it was so absurd because I'm not a person, like I know all the research. I know that that's not true. You can't make it, but I still had this sort of everyday habitual pattern of going boys or girls, right? That just like as if that's just the right question to ask when someone tells you they have kids. Do you have experiences like that, like things where like suddenly you had to like go, wait, what? I can't even believe I've been saying that for so long.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that my crumbling of the binary like happened kind of all at once, or I mean, or, like, over a very short period of time, and 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 I think it hit me in a different way because I don't think I knew better before I learned. Like because I grew up in Mormon culture. I just grew up in like a culture that invented the binary, like lived off the binary. So it just it truly until and also because of how old I am, like I was born in 86. And so I just like look at all these like youngsters who have like TikTok and, like blogs and the internet. And it was just like, it just, I had no idea. I had no idea, about there were only boys and girls. What are you talking about? And their experiences were incredibly different, like, of course. And until I was like my early 20s, went to school, like started taking sociology classes, gender studies classes, and that was just when it was just like this dump, right, of like of information. And I think that just very quickly it was just like, oh, there's more to this than boys and girls. And I think my language change shifted pretty quickly. And then also in a time where like I was just young and didn't know a lot of people who had kids. I mean, right, like I wasn't interacting with a lot of pregnant people or whatever, or even a lot of parents. So I think that it had kind of like it had become my new habit to just be like, how old are your kids? I think like a long time ago. So by the time I started thinking about having kids, I felt more like well versed in it or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess like that is so not to say like I didn't do that, because I think I did that all the time. But I do think it kind of went from like just believing the world was totally a binary to not, and trying to really figure out how to change my language for that. But it does drive me it drives me bonkers, when people are saying, like boy or girl, or just like even just, being around somebody just like last week who was like, I really want to get pregnant again because I really want a girl, and there's just this part of me that's just like, but what about having a girl is something that like you can't have with your sons, like what is that? What is the experience that you're thinking you're going to have with a girl? And also like girls who are born after like two boys are very similar to their brothers, in a lot of ways, or, because like of like who they're around. But just that whole thing of like, do you want a kid to go shopping with? Do you want a kid to get pedicures with? Like, do you want to dream about like a wedding to plan? Like, you don't know if your daughter's going to be into those things, or, and you don't know that your son isn't going to be into those things, or so just total, like, it's just this, it's I think gender, it's just like the final frontier of like
I was just about to say the same thing. It's running a feminist company for 10 years. I just that was seeking to instill progressive values in women around money. Um, just realize that how deeply ingrained gender essentialism is in the way we think about the world, and so many, even those who consider themselves and are in many ways progressive, they cannot, and I'm talking to all of you out there, I wonder where you are on this, thank you for still being here. It is such a fundamental break in how we understand who we are and our roles in the world, and all that we've been indoctrinated in terms of, if you're a woman, you're more likely to be more nurturing because the cerebral cortex like operates at a different level, blah, 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 all of which is like totally disproven. And it's just, but you're right, it is this frontier of discomfort of, it's really hard to have this conversation with people when the feminine energy and the masculine energy are still permeate pretty much everything we talk about culturally.
Well, and it can be hard to imagine something outside of it. And I feel like that's why I'm quite lucky to be like, but I think my perspective has moved beyond like the binary. Like I never really got on board with like the future is female, like, type of thing. Like I totally got on board with like the future is intersectional, the future is non-binary, right? Just like, yeah, hell yeah, I want to see more women in leadership. Hell yeah, I want to see, like more women like in politics, and stuff. But I also want to see more non-binary folks and more intersex folks, and I want to see more dads like at home. And and I also want to see like, I don't know, I just want to see it all. And that was something that even Brent and I have had to like, that's been a really hard part of gender creative parenting, is like the negotiations that have to be made about gender within our own relationship around parenting, right? Like I think for example, like because I've been socialized as a girl and a woman, and like that's what I was raised with, and so like I have internalized a lot of the values of like good motherhood and like a clean home and beep bop, that stuff. So when I was pregnant, and definitely like identifying as a cisgender woman, and you're just inundated with like the pregnancy and new mom, culture. And it's just like breast is best and you need to breastfeed, until your child is 2. And I'm like, I'm going back to work in 11 weeks. Like, like I can't, making those like sacrifices of like, what, I'm not going to be like the perfect mom, because I'm actually really much more interested in being an equitable parent. And I need Brent to also be responsible for keeping this child fed and alive. Right. And so like Costco formula is going to be in the mix, because I don't want to carry this burden. And that's like almost a guilt, that got put on me of like, you didn't lean into motherhood the way you were supposed to, like you didn't do what was like best for your child, and it was like, I just felt like actually what was best for my child was going to be having 2 parents who were rested and like, and their mental health wasn't like hanging by a thread. So,
well,
but,
I just want to offer
things.
to you that being in that exact situation, I very consciously, probably because I was raised with less gender conforming parents than most are. And because I've often been in the breadwinner role, after 4 weeks of breastfeeding, I was like tough. I like cut them off,
Yeah.
And in my like,
And are they alive?
circles, what's
Yeah.
that?
And they're alive
I
and
think so. I don't
thriving
really
and so
know right
smart.
now.
Yeah.
But I would talk about it publicly often, and really like enjoyed stewing in the discomfort of the room, just so that the women there who were in this position could also draw that line. And it's really, these are some of the things that we have to talk about more, because it is just so exhausting trying to fulfill on all of that, and that the mother's happiness is the child's happiness, and that means maintaining. So I wish we had been closer friends. I would have helped you get rid of that one, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know. Do you have any questions you want to ask us?
Yeah, I mean, let me look at my little notes here, Jordan, of like the things that I read. And I did like how much props to you for being so honest and vulnerable in this, and like, talking about your learning, curve in your past and everything. I really appreciate it. I liked reading at the end how for Jordan and Amanda, how you didn't want to live together for for
10
a
years.
while.
10 years we
Yeah,
avoided it. It was awesome.
I think that's great, and so different, right, than the norm, right, that like you consciously were thinking about this. And I would love to hear a bit more about that, and how like how did that, when you did move in together, because you just moved in together last year, right, with like the pandemic. And like, do you think that having had like the 10 years like living apart, like do you think that it helped you be able to like navigate moving in together better, or like how were you handling like the parenting dynamics that you had to before?
Ooh, how much time do we have?
Yeah. No, I think I just think you have a really cool opportunity, right? Because Brent and I we're probably we're gonna move back to the States, and we're thinking about moving to Portland. And I was like, I would love my own room. I'm like, I love you, but I would like love my own room, and he's like, cool, like maybe we can find a house with 3 bedrooms, but like being able to just like have conversations, about things that are unorthodox in relationships, and go against like what you're supposed to want in a perfect relationship, because it's because of something that you think will work better for you. So I'm keen to hear about that.
Well, I'll set the context and then pass it over to Jordan. Being raised, I always felt really weird. I was thought I should have been a boy. I was always really, really ambitious. I was raised by a single mom who cultivated that. And then I got married really young to my first husband, and I was miserable. I was like, there's nothing about this role of wife that I thought I wanted that makes any sense for me whatsoever. So when we separated, I was like, no more husbands, no more boyfriends, no one ever controlling me. Like, I am done. And at this moment at a traffic light, Jordan, who I knew as a child, pulls up to a traffic light, and this friendship emerged from that. And what has I was telling him this night, I never and because we might have lost you.
I got you back.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Are you back?
Yeah. But I know that Jordan pulled up to you at a traffic light and was a friend from childhood, and that you were able to like build your relationship on friendship.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and I was sharing with Jordan last night that, I never imagined, even when I separated from my ex-husband, that a relationship like he and I have was even possible. And one example I have of that is, I would often talk about, we should move in together. I'd have these moments where I'm like, I don't get to see you enough. I really want to see you more. And he would often say, I really don't want us to fall into those unconscious beliefs that would have you in any way become my property. Which I was like, cool, because I am never going to be your property. You don't own me. You don't control me. And as long as we're clear. And, having 10 years of, we're both fiercely independent people. So it spoke to, it really fed that side of ourselves. But now that we're living together, I don't know, dear, how has it been living together for you?
I think in many ways, I love the question, because I think that those 10 years really did prepare us to live together. It was like we knew what we didn't want to reproduce, and we couldn't imagine for 10 years how to do that in a way that looked like a traditional cis hetero household, right? We couldn't make that happen. We couldn't even imagine it. And we got 10 years of practice of sort of fiercely independent. We were always very much together a lot of the time, but we got a lot of practice on how to separate from each other, but also how to separate roles and expectations, and who does what for whom, and who does what for each other, and what those roles are, which I think gave us the ability to make it work as now what is a pretty traditional looking household, but still probably not traditional. If you watch this all day, I think you'd see a lot of things that look strange. But I think if
Except you do all the cooking and cleaning.
right. I think there's a lot of differences in there. But I think if you came to dinner, you just go, oh, they look pretty normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that you had mentioned was like your conversation around the whiteboard before moving in, but then like now how you keep score.
Yeah.
And like, what does that look like for you, of like keeping score, and how sexy is that? Like how, just like that.
Honestly, I'm losing. Like, he has all the points and I have like none of them, and I'm okay with that. So
Are you okay with that, Jordan?
Yes, no, I'm certainly okay. It's not true, because there's of course different things, and yeah, we did really carefully when we moved in together spend a lot of time going, who's going to do what, how are we going to balance this, and again, we didn't really follow what we laid out. It was just more about the idea of consciously interrogating every aspect of what it takes to, everyone we could think of what it takes to operate a home and manage the logistics of family life, and making sure we were really just acknowledging that this was work that someone had to do, and not work that someone was assumed to be better at, or to be responsible for. And so, keeping score, I wrote that we keep score with a little bit of jest. We do joke about the fact that we keep score all the time, among each other, but we don't have a scoreboard
Yeah.
anywhere. There's no like
Yeah.
scoreboard on the wall. It's more to point out the fact that what seemed interesting to me is that all the popular wisdom on relationships is don't keep score because everyone's supposed to be motivated by love. But if you look at the way that households our household labor is divided, not keeping score is necessarily going to end up in favor of the man. It's sort of like when you have a company and like if you don't have the budget line for it, no one's counting it. Right. So it was
Yeah.
more about making sure we had budget lines for every single thing where
Yeah.
we were going, this is something that has value. This is something that's getting done and has value. And so it's not so much about who's winning, right? As
Right.
much as acknowledging the value that each of us bring to the partnership, which I think a lot of couples, I know both of our previous relationships, right, struggle to do that sometimes because you have a lot of expectations for other people, and then when they don't live up to the expectations that they didn't even agree to, they're mad at you.
Totally. I think that there's something that about, I mean, you would know this definitely about like this intensive parenting, right? Like the parenting is so intensive. I think relationships are so intensive. This last year made it even more so. Like a lot of stuff came out of the woodwork, right? Of just like, I don't want to see you from 9 to 5 every day. Like we're like coworkers now, and parents and meant to be, just like romantic partners and confidants. Like there's just so much, on these like modern relationships that just really require so much unpacking and conscious effort to not fall into too many traps. Like, which I don't know, it doesn't sound very exciting, but it's just, I really have found that too, of just like going through like the ebbs and flows of just like, I feel like I'm doing more laundry. And so I'm just going to only do my laundry for a while, and like see if that is true or not, like, so I just constantly coming back to it. Cause I do think that you can actually really fall into it. And I think I think because how I was socialized in Mormonism, that like my value was totally tied up in my relationship to a man and like the children we produce together. Like I have a lot of moral baggage caught up in things like cooking and cleaning and the tidiness of my home. And I also think that the pressure behind being a public advocate for gender creative parenting, it was almost like I can't fuck up in any other part of my life. Like I have to have a tidy house, right? Like, because I'm over here, like trying to trailblaze this path and be like, maybe this is a good way to go. But if like someone was to come into my house and see that like there's a pizza box, like whatever from like 5 days ago, like, like, am I a fraud? So I just, but that is so much, I think, tied up in socialization as a woman, in a way that like being able to have those conversations with Brent is good. He's just like, I don't think about the laundry when I'm at work. I'm like, oh, really? Like what a gift. Like, how do I get there? Like,
But I think
so
that's the service you're providing is that we all grew up with certain norms that we're now proactively trying to break. But those are not, we can't just eliminate them and become something else. So your work isn't necessarily about being a gender creative parent, but it's about being who you are, striving for a gender creative parent, and then how you navigate that very murky part in between. Because that's where everyone is. There's no like
totally.
rainbow and sunshine, everything's fixed.
No, there's not.
Sad.
Well, I want you to know that I really, really enjoyed reading Father Figure,
Thank you.
Jordan. I think that I think it's a really important book. And I think that it will be really helpful because it gives prompts to people to be able to kind of unpack things, and think about their own childhood, because it really is, right? Like, I mean, this whole parenting thing, right? Like we take it from the examples of our parents, sometimes in ways of like, my parents were amazing, I want to be just like them. And sometimes of like, I'm gonna like, my mission is going to be anything but my parent, but I think being able to see that is really, really important. And I appreciate how you have told your story and the prompts that you give to people, because I really think that it's so necessary right now. Like I think a lot of dads have been left behind, and I think that it's just really important to give them some like frameworks and things to be able to consider, you know. So I'm grateful you wrote this book, and I'm really excited for it to go out into the world on May 11th.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think you said that really well. That's, I mean, the book really came out of talking to a lot of dads and recognizing that most of them wanted to live in a world that looks different than the world we live in, and really didn't know how to even begin to navigate what is a very difficult situation if you've been completely socialized to believe you're the beneficiary of a patriarchal world order, and there's no explanation for how you don't just live into that. There's not even an
Mm-hmm.
image for what the alternative is, and I mean, there's lots of little images, but I really wanted to, as you said, provide the tools that let men find their own image. I mean, I really didn't want to say this is how you should be. I just wanted to say this is the questions you have to ask to find who you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I think that there's a part in the book where you talk about, and I use this metaphor or analogy too, of like scaffolding, you know, of just like our experiences have really been built around us over decades of our lives. And then we become parents, or we become partners, or we become employees, or whatever. And we're just kind of clinging to the scaffolding that was taught to us, and that we actually have the power to go like, like maybe I could retrofit this one and like replace this one. And I think that that's a big part of like gender creative parenting, is just like, and feminist parenting and equally shared parenting is just like, this wall over here isn't really working for us, and like maybe we can redesign it. And you're not trying to like redesign the whole thing in one day, you know, but I think just being able to like recognize the rung of like, oh, dads totally are like policing their daughter's sexuality, like maybe we could not, like that part in your book where you say, like, where you quote someone who was like, weddings are for fathers and daughters. I was like, gross, like, but our histories, right? Like so many people don't even realize that like why women change their last name is because of the historical tradition that it was truly a transfer of property, right? Like
Yeah.
I am my dad's property, and he is transferring me as a commodity of sorts to like my husband now. And so, and it's just this ownership, and like I am not here to say like, and so no one should do that, because I think that it has taken on a new like symbolism and people want to share a family name. But that whole thing of just like dads being able to unpack that, right? Of like, if my daughter, or if like my daughter-in-law doesn't want to take my last name, like that can be okay. But like that's not
I have
disrespectful.
two cousins where they took three different combinations of their names and sent
Yeah.
it out to everyone in the wedding to vote, and the highest became their last name. So they both had to go through the hassle of changing their names on
Yeah.
all their legal documents, and now
Yeah.
they have a brand new
I
name.
love that. I think that that's great, right? And like I kept my
Yeah.
last name, and like Zoomer has a hyphenated last name, and like it's fine. And a lot of Generation Alpha will. And if Zoomer decides to get married and there's like 4 names now that like have to be in the mix, like it's fine. Like all of them will be fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I'm always
But
impressed with the people who have like 4 names, like those like barons of Europe, where they're like,
totally. Totally. Oh, well, this was lovely.